Before I begin, I need you to do something for me. If you're drawn to stories that challenge you, stories that make you uncomfortable, that force you to look at the gray areas of human emotion rather than the easy black and white, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because what you're about to hear isn't simple. It isn't clean. It isn't something people talk about at dinner tables. This is the kind of story people carry in silence. And once you hear it, it might stay with you longer than you expect. Now let me take you back. For years, I believed I understood who I was. I was a wife. I was a mother. I was a woman who endured. Those were the roles handed to me. And I wore them the way some women wear perfume. So often that eventually you can't tell where the scent ends and you begin. I married at 19. 19. An age when most people are still discovering who they are, still making reckless mistakes and calling it growth. But I wasn't allowed that luxury. My childhood had already taught me that life wasn't about discovery. It was about survival. I grew up in a house where quiet obedience was safer than curiosity, where speaking your mind was considered rebellion. My father believed a woman's future depended entirely on the man she secured. My mother believed endurance was love. She stayed. She tolerated. She shrank herself. And without ever saying it directly, they taught me to do the same. So when Richard Wiggins entered my life, older, stable, respected, I didn't see a man. I saw an exit door. He wasn't warm, but he was reliable. He wasn't affectionate, but he was approved of. And at 19, approval felt like protection. I didn't love him, but I thought love was optional. Security wasn't. For the first year, I convinced myself I'd made the right decision. We had a house. Bills were paid. Food was on the table. From the outside, it looked like success. But warmth never grew between us. Instead, something else did. Control. It started subtly. Comments about how I spent money. Suggestions about who I should see. Advice about what I should wear. He never raised his hand to me. He didn't need to. His weapon was quieter. He made sure I understood that everything in my life flowed through him. The house. His name. The bank accounts. His control. The car? Registered to him. Even my time began to feel borrowed. If I wanted something, I asked. If I disagreed, I paid for it in cold silences or sharp words designed to shrink me. Over time, I stopped asking. Then came my children. Adrian was born first. Fierce from the beginning. She had a fire in her that I both admired and feared. Even as a little girl, she saw her father clearly. She didn't crave his approval the way I had once craved my own father's. When she turned 18, she left without hesitation. She didn't look back. Dalton was different. Where Adrian burned, Dalton absorbed. He watched. He noticed. He felt everything. He saw the way I flinched when Richard's tone shifted. He saw the nights I pretended to be asleep to avoid arguments. He saw the careful calculations I made before speaking. And he hated it. As he grew older, his resentment toward Richard sharpened. He would step in when conversations turned harsh. He would defend me in arguments that should never have involved him. "You don't get to talk to her like that," he'd say. Richard despised that. The tension in our house became its own presence. It lived in the walls. It sat at the dinner table. It followed us to bed. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. One night, after another argument that left me feeling hollowed out, I told Richard the first was done sharing a bed with him. I didn't ask permission. I didn't negotiate. I moved into the spare room. It was the smallest act of rebellion I'd committed in years. He retaliated in the only way he knew how. Tightening financial control. Reminding me repeatedly that without him, I had nothing. Dalton saw all of it. And one evening, after another particularly ugly exchange, he knocked softly on the spare room door. "You don't have to stay in here," he said quietly. "You can take my room. I'll sleep on the couch." I should have refused immediately. But I was tired. So tired. And there was something comforting about the way he said it. Not as a child offering help, but as someone who genuinely wanted to protect me. "It's temporary," I told myself. That's how it began. The first nights felt strangely peaceful. Dalton insisted on taking the couch. I slept in his bed, surrounded by a different kind of quiet. Not the oppressive silence I had known with Richard, but a lighter one. We talked more in those weeks than we had in years. Late at night, conversations would stretch into the early hours. We spoke about Adrian, about his childhood memories, about my regrets, about dreams I had once had before life narrowed into survival. He told me I deserved more. I laughed at that. But part of me wanted to believe him. Slowly, the air between us shifted. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just small things. The way his gaze lingered a second too long. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way physical closeness, sitting side by side, shoulders brushing, felt different than it used to. I told myself I was imagining it. Loneliness can distort perception. I clung to that explanation. Then came his 20th birthday. He didn't want to celebrate. Said it felt pointless. But I insisted. I needed one evening untouched by tension. We went to dinner. Just the two of us. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. I put on makeup carefully, studying my reflection longer than usual. I told myself it was simply because I wanted to feel like myself again. The restaurant was dimly lit. Warm. Intimate in ways I hadn't anticipated. We laughed. Really laughed. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like someone's possession. I felt seen. At one point, his fingers brushed mine across the table. Neither of us pulled away immediately. It was small, but it was something. When we got home, I felt lighter than I had in years. The wine, the conversation, the illusion of normalcy, it all blurred together. I lay down without even changing clothes. I don't remember drifting to sleep, but I remember waking up. The room was dark, still, and then I sensed movement beside me. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My mind foggy, my body heavy. But the movement continued. Subtle. Rhythmic. I opened my eyes slightly. Dalton was awake. He hadn't meant for me to see. That much was clear. He was lost in his own world, unaware I had stirred. I froze. I should have shifted. Made a sound. Turned away. I didn't. Instead, I lay there, caught between disbelief and something far more complicated. It wasn't what he was doing that shook me most. It was the realization that he was no longer a boy. That time had passed, whether I was ready or not. Eventually, he got up quietly and went to the bathroom. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding against my ribs. Shame should have been immediate. But what I felt first was something else. Awareness. When he returned, he slipped back into bed as though nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The next morning, we both pretended. Pretending became our new language. We avoided direct eye contact. We kept conversations practical, neutral. But tension lingered like static in the air. 3 nights later, it intensified. We lay back to back in the dark. He shifted slightly. His back brushed mine. It could have been accidental. But neither of us moved away. Seconds stretched unbearably long. My pulse thundered in my ears. Finally, guilt surged through me so sharply I sat up and left the room without a word. The next morning, he confronted me. "I know you were awake," he said quietly. The truth sat between us. Heavy. Fragile. "I didn't mean for you to see," he admitted. "I don't know what's wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you," I replied too quickly. "We're just in a bad situation." But when he asked me to deny feeling the shift between us, I couldn't. Silence answered for me. That was the moment I knew lines had blurred too far. I moved back into the spare room that night. Distance felt like the only safe option. But distance didn't erase what had already surfaced. If anything, it made it louder. We avoided each other for days. Then weeks. The house felt colder than ever. One afternoon in the laundry room, he finally said it. "I can't pretend nothing changed." His voice wasn't angry. It was pained. "I don't know how to stop feeling this way." Neither did I. But I knew we had to. So I told him we would forget. That it would fade. He didn't argue. He just looked at me as though something inside him had cracked. After that, he withdrew in a different way. Not avoidance. Not confrontation. Just quiet resignation. Months passed. Richard remained oblivious, or indifferent. Adrian visited less frequently. and I existed in a house that felt like a mausoleum of unspoken truths. Eventually, Dalton packed a bag. "I'm leaving," he said. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Anywhere but here." He looked at me as though waiting for me to stop him, to say something that would anchor him. But I had already failed him once. I wouldn't fail him again by asking him to stay. So I nodded. And just like that, he walked out of the house. That night, I sat alone in his empty room. The silence was unbearable. Not because of what had happened, but because of what had almost happened. There's a difference. We hadn't crossed the final line, but we had stood dangerously close to it. And sometimes, proximity is enough to leave a scar. I never left Richard. Not because I didn't want to, but because years of dependence had drained my strength to start over. Dalton never returned. We speak occasionally now. Short calls. Careful conversations. Polite. Distant. There is a version of us that no longer exists. A version built on shared understanding and protection. That version died the night the lines blurred. People think betrayal is loud, dramatic, obvious. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between loneliness and longing, between protection and attachment, between gratitude and something far more dangerous. I don't know if Dalton hates me. I don't know if he forgave me. But I know this. The greatest betrayal wasn't toward Richard. It wasn't even toward Dalton. It was toward myself. Because in my desperation to feel seen, I nearly lost sight of who I was. And that's a loss that doesn't fade easily. So I ask you, at what point does loneliness become vulnerability? At what point does comfort become crossing a line? Is morality always clear? Or does it sometimes exist in shadows we don't recognize until it's too late? If this story stirred something in you, if it made you question, reflect, or even feel uncomfortable, leave your thoughts below. Let's talk about the emotions people are afraid to admit. And if you want more stories that challenge the easy answers, more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, like this video, subscribe, because there's always another story waiting. And next time, it might hit even closer to home.